So I want to begin today with a quick question, okay? Let's take a quick poll. How many of you believe that there are more distractions today than there were 10 years ago? Raise your hand. How many of you think there are less distractions today? You have to admit that there are some people in the world that we interact in that you don't want to be distracted because it could be potentially fatal. I mean, think about it. The doctor says to you, you need life-saving surgery. And you go into the operating room, and for a split second, you open your eyes, and this is what you see. You had to look close, didn't you? Or you're at the end of the runway waiting for that vacation, and the pilot says, folks, just a minute, our air traffic controller is finishing up a round of solitaire. You wouldn't want that. Or you've decided to check an item off of your bucket list, and this is the day you're going to go skydiving. You get in the plane, and the plane starts up, and this is what you see. Nobody wants to be in surgery when the doctor is checking the scores from the game, or having an air traffic controller playing solitaire while they're working. Or if you go skydiving, you don't want the person who packs your parachute to be distracted when they're doing that. Some distractions aren't fatal, but they're not inconsequential either. In a recent study of workplace distractions, several productivity killers were cited. In fact, here are the top 5 in 2025. Ready? What do you think one of them is? Tell me. What is it? Say it. Give that lady a prize. Somebody said something else. What? Give me another one. The internet. Wow, you guys are good. All right, let's pray. We're done. No. You want to know one that kills the church? That one. Gossip. How about this one? Social media. Now, if you don't think these are issues, I challenge you to do something the next time you're in a restaurant. It's a little game we play with our family. My kids laugh at it now. Count how many people in the restaurant are not on their phones. Right? Social media. Here's the 5th one. Personal email. Now I have another question for you. How many of you have a smartphone? How many of you have your email on that smartphone? How many of you actually make sure that the little number above your email icon is a 0 every night? And how many of you does it say 27,358? 4 of the top 5 are all related to technology. A lot of distractions, and they can be killers for different parts of our lives, or they can be wonderful gifts when utilized properly. Distraction is a fascinating word. And its etymology, actually, when you go back to the beginning of understanding where that word came from, it's actually very instructive. It's a Latin word, and this is the Latin for it. It's distrahere, and dis means apart, and trahere means to draw or to drag. And so really a distraction together means to draw us apart in all sorts of directions. And when it comes to your brain, it looks a little like this. We're being drawn in multiple different directions. And this is what happens. Distractions draw our attention apart. Because you and I were created to focus on one thing at a time. We get distracted when we're going in a million different directions. And most of us enable this, and I'm going to tell you why, because we'll use this phrase, it's okay, because I'm good at multitasking. Some of you are laughing, you're just like, yep, I've said that. And Earl Miller, who's a neuroscientist, a cognitive systems scientist, tells us this. He says, this is actually just an illusion. This is what he says. As humans, we have a very limited capacity for simultaneous thought. We can only hold a little bit of information in the mind at a single moment. You don't actually multitask. You task switch. And this wastes time because it makes you error prone and decreases your ability to be creative. In fact, there's another researcher by the name of Linda Stone. She did a study called the Attention Project. And she discovered that multitasking is only possible when we pair one cognitive task with one mindless task. For example, listening to a podcast while you eat. For most of us, eating is mindless. Well, for some of us, it's more mindless than others, but you know. But you don't have to think about it. So you can put a podcast in or open a book, study for something while you're eating, because one is mindless and one is cognitive. Now we integrate technology into our lives, and it's common for us to routinely engage in two tasks requiring cognitive ability simultaneously. By the way, this is the reason that teachers tell their students to leave their phones off in the classroom. It's important. Here's the thing. This routinely engaging in two tasks, it's brought about a new social disorder that actually scientists and people who study this are saying this is becoming an epidemic in our society, and it's this: continuous partial attention. Very few people who are actually able to give their undivided attention to one thing at a time. A lot of people are living in a constant state of distraction, and this continuous partial attention is a loss of focus, which equates to a lack of vision. Let me show you. Continual partial attention is this loss of focus, which leads to a loss of vision. When you and I can't focus on one thing, we can't get a picture of where we want to go. What do we want to accomplish or achieve? Where do we see ourselves going? What are we planning for now as we look ahead into the future? The more you have going on, the less able you are to sort through it to get a picture. And actually, you might think, wow, Dan, is this a church sermon or a TED Talk? It's a church sermon because in the book of Proverbs, perhaps who was arguably one of the wisest men to live, Solomon said this: where there is no vision, the people perish. Where you don't have a picture of where you're heading, where God is leading you, when you're unable to focus on that, you end up dying on the vine of busyness and distraction. We're in the season of Lent. And it's not just about giving something up. It's about moving something aside so that we can focus on something else. So we can focus on the right thing, or the thing that we're creating space to have vision or focus for. Somebody came up to me a couple of weeks ago and said, Pastor, I am giving up chocolate for Lent. It's great. I said, why? And they stopped. Well, isn't that what you do? I said, well, I don't give up chocolate for Lent. I don't even like chocolate. I said, I'm giving up TV. You want to know why? I said, because I want to make space, to make time for something else. Something in my life that will grow me. Something else that matters. So for me, it's reading more. Getting back into the discipline of reading more. What is it in your life that distracts you that you might need to give up for a season to make space for something that matters? You know, relationships deteriorate, dreams get snuffed out, organizations break down. Even if you have a vision for your life, your marriage, your family, your organization, the future, a loss of focus is functionally the same thing. Losing sight of your vision is a lack of vision. I actually didn't put this in my notes, but I'm going to tell you a little story. There was a church many, many years ago that was on the brink of dying. They literally were about to close their doors. And a pastor came in and said, look, Let's see what we can do to turn this. Let's turn it around. Here they were in a massive room that held about 1,200 people, with about 20 gathering on Sunday. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Big, beautiful altar, wonderful. And he came in and began to ask the people, what's the vision? Where do we want to go? And people said, we want to reach the community. We want to love the community. Let's get the community here and let's go to where they are. And he said, what are your ideas? And people would share ideas. And he would say, what do you need? Go do it. And over the course of about 2 years, this is a true story, by the way, the church began to grow and people had a vision for engaging the community and reaching people. In 2 years' time, that little church went from 25 people to over 700. And they ended up having to build a new space. And in the front of the sanctuary, above the altar where we have our stained glass, they had individual oak letters cut out that said, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And that pastor stayed for about 20 years. They brought another pastor in. He kind of kept things going as they were. Stayed for a few years. Another pastor came in, and he told the people, look, you've just done a little too much at one time. We're just going to leave things as they are. Nothing new, okay? What do you think happened? Church began to decline. Fast forward 30 years after that pastor who had done the work. God had used him. The church had exploded. The new pastor gets up to pray one morning. There's maybe 100 people sitting in the seats. The same canned prayer he had used week after week, and all of a sudden, the people heard a thump. They opened their eyes. He was done praying, and as he looked out at the people, he could see the whites in their eyes. Somebody pointed, and he turned around, and the W had fallen off the sign, and it said, "Here there is no vision. The people perish." True story. Sometimes we lose or we miss out because we're distracted. Maybe professionally, urgent things crowd out important things, so you miss a deadline, lose a deal, fall short of your quota, or you didn't get promoted, or maybe relationally you didn't prioritize, and now there's distance in your marriage. Little substance in your relationship with parents or resentment from your kids. I want to take you this morning to a passage in the scriptures that talks about focus and staying focused in a world of distractions. I want to take you to the Old Testament of the Bible. That's the first half, if you don't really know how the scriptures are laid out. 2 parts, the Old and the New. And the line of demarcation in between is the coming of... Yes, okay. In the book of Nehemiah, we find that the temple in Jerusalem, which is the centerpiece, the hub of where God is it's been in ruins, and it's beginning to be rebuilt, and the last thing to be rebuilt is the wall, and nobody's getting to that. But let me give you a little history. Okay, in 587 BC, Jerusalem and the temple, this is a really, really broad overview. The temple and Jerusalem are destroyed. Now we fast forward a little less than 50 years, and King Cyrus conquers Babylon, and he releases all of the Jewish exiles that are prisoners. And Zerubbabel leads the first exiles back into Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Why? If you're going to have the presence of God for the people of God in Jewish culture, you have to have the temple of God. That was the centerpiece for all of it. And in 516, the temple reconstruction is complete, but God's presence was missing. And Ezra, another book in the Old Testament, leads a second wave calling the people to return to the law of God, and it doesn't go well. So Ezra takes matters into his own hands, families are destroyed, and the people are divided. You can go back and read it for yourself. And then in 446, there's a report that comes from Jerusalem, and this is where we pick up the story in Nehemiah. Nehemiah says, I asked them about the Jews who had returned there from captivity and about how things were going in Jerusalem. In other words, what's going on? I hear the temple's been rebuilt. What's going on with all the Jewish exiles that are back? Are the people worshiping? What's happening? They said to me, things aren't going well for those who returned. to the province of Judah. They're in great trouble and disgrace. No, Nehemiah, things are not good at all. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And Nehemiah, who's a man of God, a man after the heart of God, says this: when I heard this, I sat down and I wept. In fact, for days I mourned, I fasted, and I prayed to the God of heaven. This was not new news. It had happened before they were exiled. And Nehemiah also learned that the temple wasn't being maintained. The people were not making proper sacrifices to God. They weren't living according to God's law. The ideas, customs, and religious practices of surrounding nations had infiltrated their community, and they were being embraced by the Jewish people. Nehemiah hears this and says, look, guys, we are in big trouble when anything but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob becomes our God. Now we fast forward. Early the following spring, this is Nehemiah, I was serving the king his wine. I had never appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, hey, Ne, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You have to be deeply troubled. What's happening? Nehemiah says, how can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. Nehemiah has this holy discontent in his soul for a place that he loves and a people that he loves. In fact, Cal Newport wrote a book called Deep Work, and he actually identifies this as a terrifying longing. It shakes you so to the core that it plants within you a longing for something different, a longing for something better. The king was so moved by Nehemiah's sadness and his deep longing that he said to them, the king asked, well, how can I help you? I replied, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, would you send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried? Could you send me back there? The king was moved, released Nehemiah from his role, and resourced him with the necessary support and the supplies, but Nehemiah immediately was met with threats from the outside and resistance on the inside from his own people. So not only getting it externally, but he's actually getting it from the inside too. And there were three unique types of distractions that he had to contend with. And this all came to a head as the project was nearing completion. I want to look at how Nehemiah stayed on target with rebuilding the wall and restoring his people. And then I'm going to get you back to those three things. But look what it says. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors and the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages on the plain of Ono. And by the way, Nehemiah was smart because he knew they were against him and they were up to no good. So Nehemiah is up on the wall, and here's his response. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Nehemiah was aiming his life at something significant, of something of significant value. 4 times the invitation came. Come talk to us, Nehemiah. We want to have a meeting with you. And 4 times he said, let's say it together. Ready? I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. The 5th offer came with a made-up story stating that Nehemiah's real intentions were a rebellion. And that one was accompanied by a threat to tell the king a lie about him. But Nehemiah didn't budge. He would not be drawn away from the vision that God had given to him. But the question is this: with all the opposition, all the distractions, how is that possible? I could just hear them. Oh, Nehemiah's arrogant. Nehemiah's full of himself. Nehemiah's overly confident. Nehemiah's this. Nehemiah's that. And in his mind, he says, no, God's given me something to do, and I'm going to set out to do it even in the face of opposition. When the king asked him, why are you so sad? Remember Nehemiah's response? How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. The temple was a physical symbol of God's faithfulness to his people. Nehemiah was convinced that rebuilding its walls was essential symbolically and functionally to restoring his people. It was the visible, tangible reminder of what God would do. God's chosen and set apart people. God's favor for them. And Nehemiah's terrifying longing both captured and required his full attention. He knew what he had to do. He knew he would face opposition. In fact, very often when you're doing something of significance for God, you will face opposition. And sometimes it will come from all around you and outside of you, and sometimes, fortunately, it comes from the people who are closest to you. David Brooks writes this: if you want to win the war for attention, don't try to say no to the trivial distractions. Try to say yes to the subject that arouses a terrifying longing in you, something your heart longs for, and let that longing crowd out everything else. This is precisely what Nehemiah did when he said, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. And it's important to note that this longing served as the fuel source for empowering his vision and sustaining his focus. And here's what we've learned from Nehemiah. Maybe you've learned it in your life too if you've taken a risk. If you've set out to do something that people said, you're never going to succeed. You can't do that. That's not possible. Let it go. It's not worth your time. Great work is found just on the other side of a terrifying longing. Your holy discontent. It's that deep, intense desire that emerges when you question your circumstances or you find yourself unsatisfied with your current reality. And you say, you know what? It's time to do something about this. The problem is, as a society, we become accustomed to medicating or numbing that type of longing and sadness that's often at the heart of a holy discontent. And it can be terrifying because it leads us out of our comfort zones into uncertainty and embracing change to pursue a greater meaning, a greater sense of fulfillment. And it's usually a mixture of three key elements. The first one is there's a problem. We're able to see what the problem is. Then we see the possibilities. And when we see the possibilities, we have a passion. And we say, you know what? We can do this. By God's grace and by God's help and by his enabling, we can do this. This sermon is not about me. But I have to tell you, when I was writing it, it kept ringing in my mind when I told colleagues that I was leaving a church first of 800, then of about 1,500, and now I was coming to a Lutheran church in the middle of nowhere in Pinckney, to a church of 70, and they said, just let it die, Dan. You can go anywhere at this point. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, we don't want to go anywhere. We want to go here. Because I love this community. This is about God here, because there were risks and there have been sacrifices. But there was a problem here. But there was also possibilities. Because they said there's still school happening. As long as there's kids in school, there's families in our community. And as long as there's families in our community, they need a church. And they need the church that welcomed me 20 years ago, broken, and said, let's heal you and put you back together and restore your love for ministry. That's what happened in me. There was a problem. There was a possibility. And I have to tell you, this was almost an NPR moment. Oh, NPR in my house means no prayer required. It's just like that obvious. And I remember turning to Jill and saying, Shalom. And she said, yes. I go, like, really? That's it? Yes? She said, Dan, those are our people. And it separates. There's a problem that needs to be solved that involves the possibility of how things could be different, and it involves a passion. In his book, Visioneering, one of my favorite pastors unpacks the story of Nehemiah. And he says this: vision always begins as a solution to a problem. That's the intersection of this terrifying longing and the solution to a problem. We have a mission here at Shalom to help people learn to love God, to love others, and to serve the world. But there's another part of who we are, and it's really been staring me down. And I don't know, we've talked about it very much, but I've discovered something. For decades, Shalom has been a place where people come to heal. Because you love in such profound ways. And you don't make people clean up before they come. You welcome them as they are. And you take them, you put your arm around them, and you walk with them. And what we do is we allow God to grow whole people for the whole world. And so, when there's a problem and a possibility and passion, you know what else there is? There's a great work. There's a great work to be done. What's your great work? What's your wall? What are you building, or who are you building? Regardless of this season of your life, I believe God has something great for you in it. In fact, later on in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, who wrote more than 2/3 of the New Testament, would say it like this: we are God's handiwork. Who's we? You, me. Created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And if you don't believe God can do great things, that's not simply a lack of confidence in you. It's discounting the handiwork of God. He's designed you, gifted you, and placed you where you are to do something great in the world. And if you're not a Jesus follower and you felt stuck or aimless, or you found that the things that you thought would fulfill you have turned out to be empty, it's possible that God has something greater for you. And by connecting to a relationship with Jesus, He wants to speak to you, to empower you, and to lead you. Oftentimes, these good works are connected to roles that He's already given to you. It could be teaching or leading, providing for people's safety, serving, plumbing, electrical. I hear people say to me all the time, I was just doing fill in the blank, and a conversation started, or an opportunity arose. I got to talk to somebody. Somebody prayed with me. The challenge is when those things, those unique things that God has given to you and put you in, are routinely only getting a portion of our attention. Look at the good work that God's already entrusted to you. You're doing a great work, whether others think it's great or not. Raising children, investing, providing for people, being a light that points other people to God. That is a great work. Parents, teachers, coaches, mentors, investing in the next generation is a great work. Marketplace leaders creating meaningful jobs and necessary income is a great work. Nonprofit leaders serving your under-resourced and marginalized community is a great work. Paul emphasizes the idea when he says this: when you do whatever you do, do it with all your heart. Do it with this terrifying longing that grips you, as if you're doing it unto the Lord, because you are doing a great work. 48 years ago, a young man pulled into Pinckney, believing that this community needed a center for faith grounded in a Lutheran heritage. People joined him, and then they joined him again, and more people joined him. They had a terrifying longing to draw bigger circles to include more people like the ones that Jesus drew. And I asked the founder of that place as I was preparing this, did you face any obstacles? Oh, he began to chuckle. Oh, Dan, you have no idea. We had no place to go, so we met in a train depot. The mice would run around on the ceiling during church. I could hear them. People opposed us. Said it couldn't be done. Some of you had a front row seat to see the great work that they committed themselves to, refusing to come down from the wall, which has impacted thousands of people through the ministry of this church. You've sent off countless pastors and leaders, raised up generations of Christ followers. And how silly to even embrace the idea that at one point in time God was done. Maybe he was just beginning. Their courage and focus serves as an incredible illustration of what's possible when you allow your God to grip your heart with a holy discontent, because great work is often found just on the other side of a terrifying longing. What is it for you? You know the problem. God's opened your eyes to the vision and the possibilities of what could be and what should be. So here's my prayer for you. May God sensitize your heart to the longing he has placed in you. May you discover or rediscover clarity regarding the great work that because of his handiwork, he's prepared in advance for you to do. Did you know that God has a vision for the rest of your life, and there's no retiring from it? And may you do whatever you do with all your heart as unto the Lord. May you stay focused and fueled by that passion inside of you. And in the face of distraction, when it comes from outside and when it comes from the inside, may you courageously declare, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Let's pray. God, thank you for the work that you have begun in each one of us. The work that you've begun in the world. This is your world. You shine in all that is good, and you call us to envision something greater than ourselves, bigger than what we just see or the obstacles that are in front of us. So God, use each of us individually in the vision that you have put in each of us. Maybe it's vision for a better marriage, a better relationship with our children. Maybe it's the vision to repair something that's broken, or to go after a career that would be fulfilling, or maybe it's to commit, God, to what you're doing in the life of this local church. May we declare with the saints like Nehemiah, I'm not coming down. There's a great work to be done. Thank you for what you're doing in the life of this church. We're not coming down. Great things have been done. You're doing great things in We're so grateful to be a part of it. And we look forward, individually and as a collective community. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.